name is Danielle Gonzalez. I'm the managing director of the Aspen Education and Society Program, and it is my privilege and my honor to welcome all of you here today to our headquarters for an amazing event featuring some fantastic speakers. We're thrilled to be sharing with you a suite of new tools and resources that we've developed for state education policymakers over the course of the last several months. I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment, but just want to continue to encourage folks to come on in, grab a seat. For those of you who are following online through our live stream, just an encouragement to use the hashtag #EduLeadership. For those of you in the room, an encouragement to do so as well. You have all of our Twitter handles up on the screen over here. The hashtag again is hashtag #EduLeadership. So with that, I'll go ahead and get us started. As I mentioned, we're here to release a suite of new tools for state education policymakers. And it is a really critical moment that we are in states and in state education leadership. As everyone knows, we just had an election in November. That election will bring in at least 20 new governors, a slate of new State Board of Education members who were elected in November, but many more who will be appointed by governors over the course of the next several months and years. A slate of state legislators, and along with some new state education committee chairs. So a whole lot of new folks coming into positions in states. And it's a critical moment for states as well because of where we are in education policy and education reform. States are at a moment where they have more capacity, more funding, more policy levers, and more flexibility than they ever had. So if you combine all of those folks coming into office, all of the opportunity that's ahead of them with the resources that they have, this is a tremendous opportunity for state education leaders. And we're also framing this event and the tools in front of you as about the changing of the guard, because we have a new guard of leaders coming in. Certainly the folks who were elected and are appointed are part of that new guard, but part of the new guard is also the families and the students and the employers and the other stakeholders that need to be included in education policy. So just making sure that those folks are part of the new face and the new guard of education leadership. We also know that this is a tremendous opportunity to focus on equity, and to focus on equity in many different ways, to focus on it in terms of closing achievement gaps and improving graduation rates, but also to think about how we create schools and learning environments that are safe and welcoming for our students and for our families. An opportunity to create a true sense of belonging both in the schoolhouse and in the state house. So you'll be hearing from some speakers in a moment who will talk to you about how state policymakers can go about doing that. The last thing I want to say about this moment that we are in is that it's unfortunately a moment of some political rancor, a little bit of challenges in doing some bipartisan policymaking. Some of you may have heard that. We've been hearing a lot from folks in the field about how challenging it is to go about making policy, but also to make education policy. It has just become much more political. And so for us here at the Aspen Education and Society Program, we spent some time over the last year thinking about how we can respond to that. How can we use our unique perch to convene leaders of different backgrounds, different political backgrounds, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, different ages, urban, suburban, and rural, all around the same table to talk about how we come together to make education policy. And with that in mind, I just want to recognize the amazing partnership organizations that worked with us in this process to put together these resources. All of the credit is due to them. They came together, put aside disagreements, worked across differences, worked across political lines, and put aside specific policy agendas to put together resources that really put forth what this group thinks are the most important information, the most important questions, the most important research for new state education policymakers to be thinking about. And so I just want to recognize and ask you to stand, if you're in the room, all of our partner organizations. So if you're representing one of our partner organizations online, you can go ahead and tweet that out. Also, if you're in the room. So I'm just going to call out the Council of Chief State School Officers, the Council of State Governments, the Education Commission of the States, Education Reform Now, Teach Plus, please stand, the Center for American Progress, the George W. Bush Institute, the Education Strategy Group, the Foundation for Excellence in Education, and RISE Colorado. If we can give all of these partner organizations a round of applause. Now, what you really came here for is the amazing speakers that you're going to hear from in just a moment. So I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to share some brief remarks to talk to you a little bit about their work to respond to this moment that we are in. And then we're going to have a panel moderated by the Aspen Institute President and CEO, Dan Porterfield. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of the speakers right now, and they will just come up in succession, one after another. So the first person you will hear from is Secretary Pedro Rivera, who is the Secretary of Public Education in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, also the President of the Board of the Council of Chief State School Officers. After Pedro, you'll hear from Manny Lamar, who is the Executive Director in the Governor's Office in Nevada of the Office of Workforce and Innovation in Nevada, something like that. You'll hear from Manny after Pedro. Then you'll hear from Veronica Crespin Palmer, who is the Executive Director and the co-founder of Rise Colorado. And last but certainly not least, you'll hear from Senegal Mabry, who is a student activist and a leader in the state of New York. Again, just an encouragement to follow along on Twitter. The hashtag is EDULeadership, and we look forward to engaging in the conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. First, I have to take a moment and really share how exciting it is to be here and reconnect with my peers who do amazing work across the country on behalf of kids, and really continuing this work about providing equitable opportunities for students across the nation. You know, I guess first I want to take a moment and address the big burning question that we usually receive as state chiefs is, how do you become a state chief of education? Every once in a while, it even comes out as terms of folks saying, how did you become the state chief of education? You know, and so I'm especially proud when I'm able to say, I don't know. I have no idea how you become a state chief, but I do know what drives us to do the work that we engage in each and every day. And that really is a focus on students and the focus on communities. You see, I think back on my time, you know, as a state chief, and really this opportunity that I've had to come together through CCSSO and the Aspen Institute, and really realizing that, much like you're going to see here today, we come from varying different backgrounds, and we have, you know, different political leanings. But at the end of the day, everyone that we engage with and everyone that you hear from today is focused on meeting the best needs and creating opportunities for each and every student and their communities. So because of this and because of our shared goals, I'm especially excited to continue to engage in this conversation that I'm passionate about, and it's creating conditions to ensure students have every opportunity available to them to receive instruction in regards to with rigor and relevance. See, after graduating college, I had an opportunity to go back home and serve in the community that I grew up in. I was a teacher at Kensington High School. In the area of Philadelphia known as the Badlands. Not to be confused with the Badlands of South Dakota. So the Badlands of Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, on October 10th, New York Times article came out saying trapped in the Walmart of heroin. You know, so this was the community that I was really proud and happy to return to. I was a young teacher, you know, aspired to change the lives of kids each and every day. But what I quickly, you know, noticed was I was a kid teaching kids. And the students that I returned home to were even bigger knuckleheads than I was when I was in their shoes. And each and every day, as I did, walking in and out of a classroom, we had groups of students who were shouldering much more than just that traditional backpack when they walked into schools. And, you know, so I realized that in order to connect with my students, I had to really look at, you know, trying to find ways to meet some of their most basic needs. If we had to make sure that students were fed and they were healthy and they were really in good, nurturing environments. You know, I remember some of my, you know, favorite memories are payday Fridays, where I'd go to the local pizza shop and I order the extra large cheesesteak, and that's with. So if you're from Philly, you know that means you're going to get fried onions if it's a Philly thing, but you know, really important distinction for our kids. And so I'd cut it up in 5 pieces and I'd open the cellophane wrapping, and then the aroma would go onto the hallway, and it never failed. You know, within minutes, little heads would start popping into my room, and students would ask, so what are you doing? Knowing that they just wanted to eat my food, right? I'd look up, and with the most loving look I could, I'd say, you know, kids really get on my nerves. Come in and eat, and we'd engage and we have great conversation. Because one of the things that I realized that, you know, these weren't just nice things to do as an educator. These were issues that we needed to meet their most fundamental needs. And as I continued, to grow in education, I realized that we have to remind ourselves when a child is hungry, they aren't focused. When a child is scared, they're going to act out or they're going to be guarded. When a kid doesn't know where they're going to be going home to at the end of the day, or their parents are safe, the adult in front of them isn't going to make a difference. And quite frankly, when they don't feel well socially or emotionally or physically, they're not going to do their best. And the conversation that we have to engage in each and every day is, why would we expect them to? So when you think of, as I solicited those resources and we engaged in the practice of classroom instruction, that practice also really informed my experience as a principal, as an executive director, as a school leader, and ultimately as a state chief. Now, I want to be clear, these aren't experiences that we as an institution, that a school should handle on its own, that a system should own or be responsible for. These are opportunities that I believe that is our collective responsibility of state leaders in education, of everyone in this room, to remove systemic barriers, as well as align resources and then offset the current pressure on the system. Now, I know we'll take a minute. I want to share a graphic with you. Everyone has seen this graphic. So this graphic that represents equity, equality versus equity. And within this graphic, we always spoke about sharing resources and, ensuring that we give the resources to some of our most vulnerable kids. But I'd like for us to think about this a little differently and share a new graphic with you. What if system leaders like us worked to remove those obstacles and those barriers? What if we worked together to ensure not only that we provided resources, but there were no systemic barriers in front of kids that kept them from achieving the resources they need? And I want to share something. If we work together and understand that this is doable, and we know that in order to accomplish equity, we have to create conditions for learning so that every student has equitable access to the right resources and supports at the right moment when they need them. I want to repeat that because this is really how we focused and have defined equity in our Department of Education. Creating conditions for learning so that every student has equitable access to the right resources and supports at the right moment when they need them. Not when we feel like giving it to them or the manner by which we want to give it to them, not between the traditional school hours, school weeks, or business hours. And if we want every student to reach the high potential, the high bar we set for them to achieve in college, career, and communities, we have to ensure that we're addressing and meeting their mental health needs, their physical health needs, that we're working to address their social emotional needs, especially those students growing up in poverty. Because we know that when a student feels safe and secure, they can also better develop the life skills necessary to compete in a global economy. We know that they build resiliency, have healthy coping mechanisms, and they're able to better manage their time and make sound decisions. So I want to reiterate a really important point, and that is this broad array of supports is not just the job of the classroom teacher. The education system should be first focused on education. It's the only way we're going to break that cycle of poverty. It's the only way we're going to create resources and supports for some of our most vulnerable communities. And so it's not just about educators doing more in school with the resources they have. It's about creating a system set up to allow the community to be partners in this work. So I think about my former students and how much they shouldered when they walked through our door. And I'd like for you to consider this as an actual backpack that they carry, not the political backpack you hear about, an actual backpack of services. What if we're able to fill those backpacks with the supports students need to reach their full potential? What if the student who's sick and hasn't seen a doctor has access to a health clinic at school? Or the student whose backpack never holds a meal receives a meal at school, one to take home for dinner, and why not a meal for them to take home over the weekend as well? Or a student who is sad or hungry, sad or angry or hurt, has access to mental health professionals in their building to address their social emotional needs. You know, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that every student is healthy and happy. We want to make sure that we graduate students ready to succeed in life, and we can do this by providing that full backpack. I mean, quite frankly, isn't it what we want for all of our students? I know it's what I want not only for my students, but for my little girl, who's smiling up there and, you know, great smile, smiling in the camera. So imagine if we create an environment where every kid can smile like our kids do, because we know that their needs are being met in not only in their classroom, but in their buildings and throughout the community. And if we're serious about equity and serious about expecting all students to meet the highest expectations academically, systems leaders like us have to take responsibility for filling that backpack. So there are lots of ways to approach this work. When I was superintendent in the school district of Lancaster, we made sure that our schools were a hub of services for kids. We had on-site health clinics. We had on-site eyeglass clinics and provided 2 pair of glasses for every student who needed them. 1 pair for school and 1 pair for home. We had mental health providers providing services on-site in our buildings, even for students uninsured and non-insured, uninsured and underinsured. And most importantly, we had those same clinicians working with our staff to help them build strategies to meet the needs of some of our most vulnerable students. Create environments where students felt safe, secure, and served. Now, we also had to create a system of supports. We brought community members together to engage in deep conversations, to have data conversations around what we see not only in our schools, but in our community, so we can share resources and plan and act accordingly. And like many other state chiefs, my local experience informed our policies at the state level. I know our neighbors in New York have been doing some, nation-leading work in engaging stakeholder feedback to ensure safe schools and safe climate engagement. In Illinois, they've been creating some amazing strategies to engage multiple systems to support some of our most vulnerable and traumatized communities. Even Alaska is going to be releasing a tool designed to engage families and communities to really focus on meeting the holistic and social and emotional needs of students. Now, I always like doing this because as I look around the room, if you're like me, you're wondering why didn't they, share what we're doing or share our state? And part of that is by design. Because this year I have a great opportunity to lead in the Council of Chief State School Officers. So one of the things that we are going to do is create this collective platform. We want to engage our partners to help harness the work that's already done across the nation so that we can share it, celebrate it, and even create a little friendly competition. We want our state chiefs to share how they've engaged policies to meet the holistic needs of kids, how they secured funding, and some of the best practice strategies across the country that focused on the needs of kids. We really are excited about this opportunity to create a toolkit informed by state chiefs for leaders across the country. And CCSSO is also planning to share the recommendations expected to be released in January by the Aspen Institute's National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. So I ask you to join me in thinking about the following. How can we as leaders and advocates and community members work together to meet the opportunities to fill the backpack and meeting the tremendous needs that students bring to school each and every day? How can you do what you do to maximize opportunities for educators to focus on instruction, breaking the poverty gap and breaking and creating opportunities for kids? So I'm proud to be part of this amazing advocacy community we're here today, but I'm more excited hopefully to be part of a movement where systems leaders, where state chiefs can come together with you to create opportunities to better serve our kids in the classroom and beyond. So thanks for your attention. I look forward to sharing this opportunity with the rest of my colleagues.
I'll stand on the stage since I'm 5'6". It'll get me a little bit higher. All right, thank you everyone for being here. Many of the partners. I'm Manny Lamar. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation in Nevada. We work to create we partner with K-12, post-secondary, the publicly funded workforce system, business and industry and labor to really think about creating a more aligned workforce system, ecosystem. So again, I want to thank the partners, thank you all for being here and willing, again, listening to this piece here. On my end, for me, the workforce, I'm particularly passionate about it, and that when I first started, when I was teaching in Miami, when I was teaching in Miami, at least part of the challenges were all linked to, quite frankly, one, zip code, and two, family household income. And so I think that as we think about education policy, there's a broader array of alignment that is required, that is needed to ensure that one, students are in meaningful career pathways, and then two, that we actually help uplift families in terms of their household incomes, quite frankly. So just really quickly, for me, when I think about the vision for education policy as it relates to think about this new guard of leadership, it's really one where all students and young people have the skills, knowledge, experiences, and disposition to succeed in such a dynamic labor market. And that vision really is grounded in the fact that, one, we need to think about it in a much more inclusive way. And what I mean by that is that all adults in the workforce system should be actively supporting those young people to engage in those career pathways. And two, it should account for regardless of the zip code that you live in. And so all of us as adults should be really actively engaged in helping students find their purpose, finding their why, and engaging within the workforce ecosystem and engage in meaningful career pathways. Now, unfortunately, there are some statistics, particularly when I think about it on the workforce side, that quite frankly keeps me up at night, and that I think that we should all be thinking about more broadly. So two that I'll mention, one is youth labor force participation rate. This is something we often bring up. So there's a variety of reasons and theories around the decrease of youth labor force participation rate, but we know that for the past 20 years, it's actually declined in the US. Now, when that is juxtaposed with the fact that the US is getting older, and older people are projected to outnumber young people, we know that there's a mismatch, and that if young people aren't getting into the career pathways, they earn less. So a report from the Center of American Progress projects that young people will lose $22 billion out within the workforce system as a result of their disconnect with the labor force. They'll earn about $22,000 less. And again, all of that means something very concretely for households and what that means about the opportunities that they have. Another statistic, so the youth labor force participation rate, when juxtaposed with the rise of the population and the age. But the other important statistic that we often think about is that unemployment rate, when we think about it, if you disaggregate it by race, for example. And this is the piece when we're talking about equities. So unemployment in the US, although it's 4%, it's slightly below 4%, but for African Americans and Latinos, it's often higher. So right now it's actually 6.6%. During the peak of the recession, it was actually 16%. And so as we think about another report from the Economic Policy Institute concluded that by 2053, Black households will have a median wealth of 0. Latino households in another 20 years will have 0. Now, as we think about such a dynamic labor force, but as we think about building communities, quite frankly, those tensions, some of those tensions is in part leads to some of these inequities that we have within our broader community that we can't really just ignore, and we should think about how do we build it more broadly. Now, I am optimistic for a variety of reasons. One of them, and this is the more like wonky piece of my statement, which is that I do think that there's a much greater alignment, one, with federal policies. Think about building, to Pedro's point, the broader ecosystem. So when you think about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, it's the workforce legislation that guides workforce in the US. When you think about Every Student Succeeds Act with K-12, and if you think about even just the recent reauthorization of the Carl Perkins Act, there's actually a lot more greater alignment and opportunities for leaders to make and build more comprehensive ecosystems. We also think about public and private partners engaged, whether it's foundations, local education agencies, state agencies, local nonprofits, communities and schools, organizations that's working to create a more comprehensive, holistic support It's not one or the other, it's the whole piece. And I really do think, Pedro, you hit it right on the money with that. But I am optimistic in that there's a lot more alignment with policy, and we have an opportunity to engage with that. Now, with that said, I would say that there's 3 implications for leadership. One, at the end of the day, particularly in policy, it comes down to relationships. This is something I had to learn really quickly, engaging in policy. But quite frankly, for better or for worse, good relationship with students and families could help you implement even bad policies. Poor relationship with students and families can halt even good policies from being enacted or being implemented. And that's just a really important context. And so what that might mean for leaders, it might mean making sure you have translators. It might mean not having it in the bureaucratic government building that to us is friendly, but to outsiders that are, to families, might seem intimidating. A second point, it's about developing partnership and solutions with business and industry and the publicly funded workforce system. So understanding connections with your local workforce development boards that have federal resources to support some of your students' families, right, regardless of their challenges. The standard blame game goes something like this. Business blame education, education blame families, families blame communities, and then the cycle kind of continues and repeat, and we're still at the same place. So we need to think about much more broadly and holistically about these partnerships and bring people to the table on the front end as opposed to the back end. And then finally, I'll say that there's a lot more greater nuance in what it means to be college and career ready. This is something that we're really pushing, and we've engaged with partners such as CCSSO, National Governors Association, and many other partners, Aspen Institute on this. But we know that most of the jobs being created, this is a research from Georgetown Policy Institute, their Workforce Development Center, whereas we know that most of the jobs being created require more than a high school education. Actually, 60% will require some form of post-secondary education. But we need to have a much greater nuance about what that means. So it could be a 4-year, but it could be an associate's degree. It could be an apprenticeship program. It's often unfortunate when I talk to young people and they say, hey, I want to go to this community college, but they don't want to say it out loud. And so sometimes I've talked to young people that decides to just not be engaged because they're either ashamed or us as adults, we're not providing that nuance about what it means. We know we need to continue our education regardless of the degree. We know that with changes in technology, that everyone will need to be lifelong learners. So you need to always constantly kind of upgrade, kind of like with Beyonce, you know, you're always upgrading, right? And so that's the final piece I'll mention. And I'll just conclude by saying this: all future problems the U.S. will face to maintain its social fabric and democracy will be directly or indirectly linked to challenges youth face to build skills, knowledge, and experiences to access meaningful career pathways. And equally important, things that we cannot run away from is the inequities that are unaddressed. And so we need to think about that. Again, thank you. And I'm really hopeful and optimistic about the opportunity that we have in 2019 to engage more further in this work. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Veronica Crespin-Palmer, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rise Colorado. We do family empowerment and community organizing work for educational equity. We work with multiracial and multilingual families in Aurora, Colorado, which is the most diverse school district and city in the state. We have families from 130 countries speaking over 150 different languages. We're an official refugee resettlement city. So growing up, I was always inspired by my grandmother, Alberta. She grew up in the projects in downtown Denver. She was in a gang, got pregnant with my dad in high school, dropped out, and went on welfare. She realized the only way to end that cycle of poverty and violence was through education. So as a single mom of 3, while my grandfather was in prison, she went back to school and got her GED, bachelor's and master's, and became a social worker for Denver Public Schools for 25 years. Yes. She's 4'5", she's small and mighty. My grandmother showed me the power of family engagement, that when families know how to navigate the school system, anything and everything is possible. Education unlocks doors for incredible opportunity. I carried that inspiration with me when I graduated from college and joined Teach for America. I started teaching 3rd grade in Los Angeles. Then I taught kindergarten. And I saw as a classroom teacher how much our low-income families and families of color wanted to be involved in their children's education, but they didn't always have the opportunity or knowledge to do so. So my co-founders and I created RISE to be a holistic family engagement model where families are their child's #1 teacher and advocate and are leading the movement for educational equity. So at RISE, our mission is to educate, engage, and empower low-income families and families of color to rise as change agents for educational equity in our public school system. Our theory of change is that those most impacted by the inequity that exists must lead the movement for change themselves. So if we look at our country's most successful social justice history and the most successful social justice movements, they've always been led by those most impacted by the inequity that exists. So Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta led the farm workers movement, and Dr. King and African Americans led the civil rights movement. So we must ask ourselves, who's most impacted by educational inequity? It's low-income families and families of color, therefore they must be the ones to lead the movement if we're ever going to truly achieve educational equity. And at RISE, we believe families are the sleeping giant. Once they're awakened to the inequity that exists, there's nothing they won't do to ensure their children receive the excellent education they deserve. And honestly, the school system will never be the same. So at RISE, we have a 3-phase model. First, we educate families about the opportunity gap and their role in overcoming it. We're very unique in that we work within the education system to change the education system. Majority of my team and I are former school leaders and teachers. And we professionally develop school leaders and teachers about best practices in community and family engagement. We do this within schools and across the community district-wide. Then we engage families and community organizing coalitions. We're also unique in that we do not have a predetermined agenda at RISE. We do not tell families what they should focus on or work on. Instead, we ask them, what's impacting your child's education? What issues are you seeing in the education system? And we support them with creating solutions and enacting those solutions to improve academic achievement across Colorado. And then we empower families through leadership development. Families step into their power and become architects and no longer objects of policy, and they become decision makers, influencing decisions being made in Aurora and across Colorado on the education system. So this is Diana Castro, one of our RISE family leaders. We met her over 4 years ago. This is her daughter Miranda and her son Sebastian. Diana came to the US from Mexico when she was 15. She spoke no English, but she was able to graduate from Aurora Central High School, one of the largest high schools in Colorado. And now her daughter Miranda also attends school in Aurora. We met Diana at one of our Parent Opportunity Gap workshops in Miranda's preschool. I'm going to share our theory in action and model through Diana's experience with RISE. So first, we educated Diana about the opportunity gap and her role in overcoming it. Before Diana came to our workshop, she had no idea that Miranda only had about a 60% chance of graduating from high school, and that only 20% of our 3rd graders were reading on grade level. Diana learned this information from Miranda's teachers who are professionally developed and trained by RISE to share this critical information with families. Diana is one of 3,000 parent leaders that we've educated about the opportunity gap and their role in overcoming it. We also professionally developed Miranda school leaders and teachers about best practices in culturally responsive teaching and race consciousness. Then we engaged Diana. We had a one-on-one with her and invited her to join our community organizing coalitions, where again, families talk about issues and challenges they're facing, make an issue cut, and then launch organizing campaigns. So families right after the election did not know their rights. They were living in terror and fear of ICE. Families did not know if they could go to parent-teacher conferences or back-to-school night. They also didn't know if their children were safe. So families came together and decided to write their own resolution to support students regardless of documentation status. This resolution they organized for months. They met with the superintendent, school board members, district officials, and shared with them why this resolution meant so much to them, to know their rights and how they would be safe in school. They collected over 800 signatures, got 32 local, statewide, and national organizations to sign on to a letter of support, and ultimately it passed with a 7-0 vote. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 1 independent voted for this resolution. It made history. It was the first resolution that was community-led and written to be passed in the United States. We're incredibly proud of families for organizing and coming together and creating such wonderful systemic change. Down here, you'll also see some of our Rohingya families. Our Burmese, Karen and Karenni, and Nepali-speaking families came together to improve interpretation and translation services across the district. Everything was coming home in English. Calls, documents, and when they'd arrive at school, there was no interpretation for them to communicate with their teachers. So families organized and asked the district for 13 different things to improve interpretation translation services, and I'm happy to report they won 11 out of the 12. So organizing is incredible. Also, if you look at our history's most successful social justice movements, organizing has always been a component. So it's crucial that we organize in the movement for educational equity. And families are incredible change makers. If you think about it, majority of our families cannot vote. They are still learning to speak English, yet they use their voices, their stories, and their experience to move an entire district of 40,000 to create incredible systemic change. That's true people power and grassroots power. Then we empowered Deanna. We supported Deanna and other Rise family leaders to be appointed to the Colorado Preschool Program Advisory Committee, where families are supporting with preschool quality and access. Deanna also had the opportunity to speak at the New Schools Venture Fund Summit in front of a crowd of 1,000 about parent power. She also had the opportunity to meet with former Secretary of Education John King about her experience being a DACA parent and the work she's doing to lead the movement for educational equity in Aurora. We've had over 20 families sitting on school and district level decision-making bodies, and we've had over 60 organizing wins, actions, and policy changes. So I ask you, what is at stake if we do not support those most impacted by educational inequity? Well, here's what's at stake in my opinion, that we will literally be in rooms just like this in 10 or 20 years having the same conversation. As I said, history shows those most successful justice movements were led by those most impacted by the inequity that exists. So it's up to us. The call to action today is for all of us to come alongside and behind those most impacted and ask them, how can we support? What do you want to fix? How can I take your lead and support you? Because if we don't, we will be having these same conversations, and our children deserve so much better. They deserve the lives they hope and dream of, and to live prosperous lives filled with an excellent education. So let's support our communities and families in getting there. And lastly, I want you to imagine, what if we had hundreds of Deannas, families who knew how to effectively advocate for their children and close the opportunity gap? Then what if we had hundreds and thousands of Deannas across Colorado and millions across the US? Join us in building the family-led movement for educational equity and rise with us. Thank you.
Thank you, boss. How's everybody doing today? Are you tired already? How you doing? My name is Senegal Mabry. I'm assistant to the Chancellor of the New York State Education Department and Obama Foundation Advisory Council member. I'm also the panelist here who's under 25, but somehow doesn't have a Twitter. Everybody else has a Twitter. I don't know why. I think you guys need to get on Instagram. My PowerPoint, or my TED Talk, or Spotlight, what Aspen's calling it, is about wishing you well and an easy way for all of you to change educational outcomes for your students across the board. I promise you it will be very simple, revolutionary, and something you probably just didn't think about. This is from Yonkers High School. It's a kind of wealthy district, in New York, and I just asked the students, what do you want most from your teachers? What do you need from your teachers to be successful? Does anybody have a favorite one they want to call out? I'll call out mine. It's a shot this is from a white kid in a Yonkers pretty wealthy district, is that they're asking for a shot. I think that's indicative of where we are in our country. Guidance, patience, understanding, kindness, respect, mentorship. People are asking for a relationship with their teachers and with their education bodies and staff. So what do you call a surgeon who can't recognize a good surgery? Who thinks they know better than medical journals and patients about what they need? And whose patients have issues after they come out of the operating room? Anybody? Anybody get a good answer? It's pretty easy. You call them a quack. What are they doing in the operating room? Why is it that our profession in education doesn't have the same standards? If you're not building a relationship with the people who enter into your classroom every single day, are you really student-focused? Are you really education-minded or equity-focused? If you don't have a relationship with the people that you're working with. Us as old people, and yes, 21 years old, I'm going to say I'm an old person now. If you don't have a relationship with your colleague, if you can't have a quick conversation with them at the water cooler, are you really going to get that project done with them? No. If I don't have a relationship with you, am I really going to let you teach me math? Of course not. You need to build foundational emotional things with people before you can start and do the education learning. This is from the 36 MBK fellows that we have in New York State. We run the My Brother's Keeper program, and we have 36 young people working as a part of nonprofit organizations, government organizations, and private industries, working to make change in their communities and change outcomes for kids just like them. For us to get to the places where they can say obligation, critical thinking, determination, evidence, and vision, we need to have a conversation with them. We need to start by saying, who are you as a person? How can I help you? What can I learn from you? As much as you can learn from them. And the easiest way for all of you to do that, here's my really quick solution to everybody. Just say hello. I think that's a quick laugh, but so many schools across the country, students will walk into classrooms with a teacher who doesn't say hello, who doesn't know their name, who doesn't know their families, know their structures, know what the obligations or the obstacles in front of them are. So if you just want to have a conversation and say, hello, how are you, who are you, can I get to know you, before you go back and you try and educate them or you introduce policy to them that will not work because they are not a part of it. We need to build an inclusive environment to be successful. So I'm curious here, for all the people who are in education organizations, if you could just raise your hand. If you're a part of an organization that does something with education, please, yep, keep them up. Oh, wow, this is so surprising at the Aspen Education Director. Keep them up, keep them up. Lower them, keep them up if you have a youth advisory board, if you have some sustainable way to solicit feedback from young people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. 10 out of all these hands. We need to find a way to continuously get feedback from young people, from the people that we want to work in this community to do the work with if we want to have outcomes really change. Does Amazon build a new product before it talks to its customers? No. Does GMC build a new car before it talks to drivers? Of course not. Why are we making education policy for students without students being a part of the process? So I think my quick solution to all of you is just say, hello, how are you? How can this affect you? How can you do this? How can we make change together? And I promise you, it'll move your numbers. Thank you so much. See you. We're trying to figure out the seating arrangements, everybody, very quickly.
So hi all, I'm Dan Porterfield, the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, which, if you don't know, is this vast people-serving force of good. It's like the Force in Star Wars. We have more than 50 programs that in different ways are seeking to empower individuals and improve the human condition. And they cover a wide range of areas, from education, college excellence, pre-college excellence, to public health, to saving the ocean, to cybersecurity, to investing in the education of young people around the world through our Stevens Initiative, through which we're working with 28,000 young people in Middle East and North Africa. Just a wide range of programs. We also run a number of leadership programs for highly successful people, like the four here, in specific fields: education, public health, global development, sometimes areas like entrepreneurship, global finance, just a wide range of tools for change making. That's what our toolbox is full. Each of you is a leader who's taken part in Aspen programs. And you've chosen to be in these programs because you want to develop yourself as a leader in new ways. You want to work with people from a wide range of backgrounds. You want to think about the issues holistically. I really want to commend you for that, because nobody's requiring you to take part in all this extra work you're doing. It all reflects a kind of a vision of leadership, I think. So what I want to do is run this a little bit like a workshop for, say, the next 20, 25 minutes. Which means, of course, you don't know what I'm going to ask you. But it's all in the spirit of respect and love. But they're all change makers. And we're talking about a sector of our society that's absolutely defining of our future. I thought you said it extremely well. Whether everything we have to do to invest in our young people to secure a future requires them giving the educational skills, the mindsets, the feeling of empowerment to be able to create their lives, create a strong society, take their place leading a political life, economic life. The transitions that we have as a society, a graying society with so many boomers retiring, place enormous responsibility and pressure on education systems to be able to prepare young people to take their place in the economy. If we're not able to really build the skills and mindsets of this generation of young people, period, they're not going to develop their lives, but also how are we going to keep the social contract as the biggest generation in history moves into retirement? That's the boomers. All you boomers out there, most important people in your lives after your family are in schools right now. Seriously, that's the key of the future, is in our schools right now. So, workshop mode. What I first want to ask each of you to do is to say something that you learned from another of you. Okay? So, because Pedro, I'm guessing, because Pedro and I are friends, we both spent years together working in Lancaster. I think you might be the oldest on the panel after me, so I'm going to make you go first. After that, it's open. Something you've learned from one of your three panelists.
Sure. I think, and I can share lots of stories, but I'll pick on, identify Veronica first. She and I have engaged around deep conversations around equity and the need, to focus on equity, so no one disagrees. What I've really done is enhanced and really gained a new perspective because of her organizing, because of the parents that she represents. Many have been underrepresented for so much time, to be a little more intentional around how we define equity in non-traditional, to make sure we're looking at equity in non-traditional ways and being more organic around ensuring equity within our education systems. And we had some deep conversations around that, and it really has helped change my thinking in terms of our practice.
Okay, so Veronica, that sounds pretty cool. The chief of education for the whole state of Pennsylvania, and this leader in his field, says he's learned about equity and diversity of ways of thinking about equity from you. Okay, cool. So anything from Manny or Senegal, you would say you have learned, and whoever she cites is going to talk about the other one.
So I would shout out Manny with the workforce development piece. I think I came in with a very prescribed notion of what workforce development means, but he really pushes. He actually presented at our summer workshop about different ways that workforce development could and should look like, but really it being community-driven change of what they want. But how important it is to think about it from all facets, from the governor's cabinet, which he's in, but also in schools, in actual practice, and on the ground level. And I think that's so important for us to have, like you said, many tools in our toolkit. So we're really meeting students where they're at, especially around workforce development.
So it's interesting, and I'm going to turn to you in a second, Manny. But your program's focus is on empowering families. But it sounds like you're saying, from Manny, you heard that just working with the families alone isn't going to get the job done. You have to listen to the employer sector?
Correct. So as I shared, we work in the system to change the system. Yeah. So at RISE, we know we have to come at it from all vantage points. So Him coming at it from the system, from the government's perspective, and the private sector is important because we need everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
If just a few of us are working in silos, we'll never move the needle. So a more holistic approach of all of us addressing the issue at once is going to get us where we need to go.
Okay, cool. So, Manny, how about Senegal? Anything here you want to say you've learned from him?
So absolutely. So just really quickly before I do that, I do want to say you mentioned about the age. My haircut makes me look a lot younger than I really am.
Yeah.
So I thank my barber for that.
I think it's also your smile. Smile makes everybody look younger.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But if I could kind of cheat and just go really quickly through. So one is that with Senegal, his emphasis and focus on students, about the students that are most impacted and making sure that we have young people in the room. Every time he speaks, I'm just like kind of rooting, snapping, bobbing my head because I'm always like just very thoughtful about how we think about students and engaging young people particularly. They're going to be the next mantle of leaders. Just really quickly with Veronica, you know, her point on family engagement really resonates a lot with me. Like when I moved from Haiti, some of the stories that you've shared, Veronica, my family didn't speak English, but it doesn't mean that they didn't care or they didn't want. And a lot of it, they were intimidated by the way the structure of the system, and they actually deeply, deeply cared and wanted to push me on the system. So your emphasis on family is, you know, just super important. And just really quickly, Pedro, I know I'm cheating with the question. And through the Aspen Institute, I've just been very kind of surprised in a good way about just his ability just to listen. And he's the chief state, really fancy title, superintendent of education. But his approach is always about listening. And so that honestly, quite frankly, reminds me in terms of my own experience within the governor's office with Governor Sandoval, is at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership. And so I've just been fortunate to be serving with a governor that really is thoughtful about leadership and includes an inclusive and diverse staff, whether it's his senior staff, and actually one of them is here, Del Urquiaga, that taught me the good things I know about workforce and the bad things I just kind of learned along the way. But so I just want to quickly mention that, which is listening to students, being thoughtful about the barriers of families, and then listening, regardless of your opportunity.
That's the A answer. Senegal. Looking down the path to this superintendent here, the elder statesman of the group, anything that you've learned from Pedro?
Pedro taught me you should always be looking to move the numbers. You're not there in your position to take up time and to take up resources, but you're there to strategically change outcomes for the people that you're working towards. And that's what Pedro is always minded on, is I'm here in this limited capacity for this period of time so that I can change the world around me and change the community that I came from. Yeah. And so Pedro has always been my inspiration in that. Veronica taught me to be bold. Always be bold in what you do. She takes absolutely no prisoners. I know you could see that from her presentation. Yeah. And Manny gives me good love life advice, always.
Each of you, I believe, has a vision that education lies at the center of a democracy, at the center of our country, and the center of community life and economic development. And I think that's easy to agree with that. And yet, in education, there is so much conflict. And those conflicts often, I would say, take the form of an either-or choice, almost a false choice. You can only have X if you don't have Y. You can only do A if you don't do B. And maybe that happens in every sector, but in education, it feels sometimes like it's like the fights are intense, really intense. The obvious one is sort of the public charter sector and the district-based sector. Some of the acrimony between the partisans of one approach or the other have reached a level where you wonder, what's it going to take to bring people together? Now, you're bonders. You're trying to build a bridge, right, that brings people together. So let me ask you, and I really want to kind of be in the lightning round because I want to go somewhere with this, but do you think it is possible to develop a third way, kind of so to speak, national agenda, locally diverse, but national in focus, where we say education lies at the center of the country and we're going to push ourselves for excellence and draw on all parts of the society to do that? Is it possible for us to have that kind of national vision that education is the critical investment we have to make, or is it just too likely to be fragmented and disparate and we're going to have to cope with a system that has a lot of chaos.
Well, at the risk of not being invited back, I'm going to say absolutely yes, you can do a third way of leadership around education, but 100% yes.
Yeah.
The reason that we get into these nitty-gritty arguments is because we forget education is about saving lives. When you're a teacher in the classroom, what you're doing is dramatically transforming the narrative of this person's life. I didn't read on grade level in 3rd grade. I had a reading recovery teacher save my life. If I didn't have my reading recovery teacher, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you right now, well dressed in this suit that President Obama lets me afford. You need to remember what is the foundation of what you're doing in education, and then you can get past all the other stuff, all the partisanship, all the anger, and all the frustration. Once you start thinking about, here's this child in front of me, I want to make sure their talent takes them as far as they can go.
Okay, before anybody else answers, so one answer, we're writing it down, one answer to why we can have a third way unifying national focus is if we focus on the foundational core value of making sure that we empower our students with a great education. Is something else needed? Can you add to that? What's needed to make a third way really powerful?
To me, we also have to put down our egos and we have to give up power. Let's be honest. To bring in the true stakeholders of the education system, families, students, low-income families, and families of color, that means a lot of us have to give up power. Yeah. That means a lot of us have to share power and elevate other voices in the room. And some of us are prepared to do that, some of us aren't. But that's at the real heart of the conversation is how do we share power and give up power so those who are most disenfranchised have a say and a voice in the education system we're creating. We're not there yet, but I do have hopes we could get there through bridge building and olive branches.
Okay, we got 2 core elements of a third way. Foundational focus on young people, share power. Anybody want to add?
No, I think one of the areas that all of my colleagues up here, shared in their presentation and in their answers, there has to be a third way. I don't think we're ever going to get one of the 2 other ways to lean, in to look at, establishing a baseline. But relationships are important. I mean, I think what we heard loud and clear is that you have to come at this change from a position of trust. From a position of understanding, and you only do that if you create organic opportunities to establish relationships.
Okay, so good. So relationships, third thing. Not just sharing power, but knowing each other and doing it in the service of the top priority, our kids. Okay, what else would you add that's new?
Probably the only thing I would add, which is embedded within all those answers, quite frankly, is leadership. Yeah. And at the end of the day, leadership matters. And so if you want someone that connects with young people, if you want someone that is able to think about power not as a zero-sum game, if I win, you lose, and if you want someone that's thinking about relationships, leadership matters in developing this third way leadership, quite frankly.
Okay, good. So what about the idea, those 4 elements critical to the third way, that there is some goal, some practical now or measurable, demonstrable goal that we should want from our education system, we could work towards? Is there anything there? And I actually don't want to give you an example of a goal, because I want you to see if any of you have goals you think for our country we ought to be pushing towards. Like that's our North Star. Go there. Third way, you're unified around leadership, sharing power, putting kids first, building relationships. Where are we going towards?
Then I'll kick us off. I think that's part of the problem is that we've not established a goal. So how do you ensure equity? How do you ensure sound investments and good, strong decision making if there isn't a goal, if there isn't a North Star, as you shared, that we should aspire for all students to reach? So if you have a really good, strong, articulate goal when we're discussing and engaging in the conversation around equity and equitable distribution of resources, then you can identify who needs what and making sure that our most vulnerable communities are receiving the resources they need to be successful towards that goal. So first and foremost, I think we deal with some of the challenges we're dealing with now because there's an absence of goal and a North Star around the education system.
This isn't easy. It's a workshop, so don't worry about saying something that later you say, I don't actually agree with what I just said. It's fine, because I'm actually just trying to move this audience a little bit to be with you and thinking, how do how do we move forward? And you are the leaders that have been willing to spend your time, put your bodies in motion together to start thinking out of the box. And so one thing that Pedro says, we do need a goal and it's hard to have one, okay? Agreed. Now
I
let's
don't know
imagine.
if it's hard to have one. I think, by design, there are some leaders that rather not have a goal. I mean, isn't
Yeah.
it nice to live in this space and not have to be accountable to anything?
Yeah, sure.
And we allow for that to happen in our system sometimes. So it's important that all of our advocacy communities and the community of leadership, reinforce the need and force the need to have a goal.
Let's just put on the table, for the fun of it, 4 goals. Knowing that these goals are maybe 10 goals that really matter, you're not going to be penalized for what you leave off, okay? Let's just say if we're building up a national consensus that we have to use every tool in our toolkit to make a difference, to empower kids to learn so we can protect them and our future, okay? So how do we even think about what the goals should be? So anybody want to put one out? You can change it later.
I'll give you 2.
Yeah.
Equity and talent are 2 solid directions in the compass if you want to go forward, is making sure everybody has access to the resources when they need them and making sure your talent will take you as far as you want it to go. So that you don't, if you have an idea or if you have a talent or you have a skill or a competency, you can use that to whatever end you see fit, for good or for ill, and try and make the most of yourself as you possibly can. And equity will allow us to remove the obstacles in front of students to get them there.
Okay, so 2 goals we just heard are 1, empower every single person to be able, through education and its alignment with everything else in society, to develop the greatness within them. I just summarized it, the talent. And then secondly, to make sure that people feel a sense of equitable investment in their future. That when they go to school, they believe that society is investing in them the same way that they're investing in others. And you think that's important, I guess, because A, you need it, and B, it sends a message.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll add one that's super concrete and lofty that I actually think we could do, but it's very concrete. It's around workforce, which is that every student is on a meaningful career pathway, and every student, and one example of being on a meaningful career pathway, and one way we get them there is to ensure every student has a work-based learning opportunity. And so that's, again, super micro level. But the reason why it's important, it goes back when I was in the classroom, that at the end of the day, all of the challenges, all of the pieces and inequities we talk about comes down to what zip code you live in, ethnicity, and your household income, really around your household income. And so I just think that when we think about the work that we're doing, it has to account for that, because people are having when we think about, Maslow's hierarchy, if you can't do those basic things and you don't have support for it, you can't get it. So every student on the career pathway, and the one way to do that is every student has a work-based learning opportunity. They could, 1, build those skills, knowledges, experiences, and disposition. They could make mistakes early on, and then, again, able to progress to their career. So that's a concrete one.
That's cool. I think there's probably about 150 people that are contemplating a run for president in the year 2020. Maybe one of you is.
No.
And I think at least half of them have
I
now
can't. I wasn't
clicked
born
on.
in the U.S.
A few tweets later. This is what we're doing. What we are actually articulating is an agenda. The beginning, well, actually a set of goals out of which you then derive an agenda. And they're logging on right now. This is a time for leaders to step up with real proposals, with bold proposals. Okay, I've got a couple. You want to jump in, Veronica?
Yes, so to me, we're driving towards this goal. It has to be locally driven. Why? For buy-in. We have done things for so many years to communities and not with them. So if we say, this is your goal, go forth and prosper, do X, Y, and Z, we've decided we're the experts and this is what's best for you. That's what we saw in the family engagement sector, that families were given excellent workshops but not tied to action, so they weren't bought in. Or families are asked to wear this t-shirt, hold this sign, and come to the Capitol at the 11th hour when decisions were already made. So how can we actually revert from that and ask families in the local community, what do you want and how do we help you drive towards those? But here's the other important caveat. How do we trust them? Trust their ideas, trust their solutions, to know they're living the challenges. Let's trust them in their ideas and co-create policy so they're living the lives they hope and dream of, and we're not placing upon them, but working alongside them to achieve those things.
So let me posit a complete agreement with that as an ethos for going forward. Okay, complete agreement. Can't get anywhere if you don't involve the community in the setting of the goals. Okay. Now, the 75 presidential candidates are watching right now, half of them are, and they want to know what you think. What do you think should be a goal? Yes, we'll go back to communities and work it out more, but still, this is a moment to add to the goal of every single child has an equitable opportunity, and every single child has the chance to develop the talent and greatness within them, and every single child has a chance to be on a pathway towards a career. Okay, anything you want to add? You yourself, knowing we'll go back to the community.
Yes. So again, I would say it is not incumbent upon me to tell families what they should want. Yeah. It's my job to ask them. So I could speak as a mother of 2 Afro-Latino children. I want my children to be developed in terms of their racial identity. I want them to read books. I want them to have teachers who are reflective of who they are. I want them to see themselves at school and not when they just come home to my husband and I. I want my children to have strong character development at school and also to live in their genius. Yeah. And what does that look like? For my son, he wants to be an engineer. So it could look like for him to explore his engineering genius. And for my daughter, she wants to be an artist. So what does it look like to meet children where they're at, but also develop them in terms of their racial identity and understand the history of this country in deep ways in terms of our racialized context. So for me, that's what I'd want, but I'd also want to ask families, because everybody's different, what do you want for your child and how do we create that so your child gets the best education possible?
Yeah, so I thank you, because letting me push you, you added something to this list, which is that you would want our education system to be able to develop the talent of people holistically so that their cultures, their community, their family, their personal interests is a part of the equation. Treating the student and the community as an asset in itself, yes, not just as an end to a particular goal. Cool. Pedro, what else do we want to add?
You know, I'm fortunate being, being a chief and being in a position where we have this conversation often, and specifically, in alignment we've created with our governor, Governor Wolf, where we shared our educational system from birth through K-12 has to ensure that our students are college, career, and community ready. And our higher education systems have to ensure that our students are career and community ready. But we've also taken a step further. We've also said our systems, our systems of education, our systems of training, our systems of workforce, have to be focused on, on equity, have to be focused on transparency, and have to be focused on innovation, because I think, as shared with everyone else, if we're not going to look through and engage through the lens of equity, but also be really open and honest and transparent around why we're doing what we're doing through our system, we're not going to create this environment where we solicit feedback and be as innovative as a system as we can be.
So I'm being the annoying moderator that asks you questions you weren't preparing for. That's really great what you just said. I'll just summarize it real fast, because that could be a goal for the country. It kind of weaves in a lot of what was said. College, career, and community ready for pre-college students. For college students, career, community ready. Community, you have to take community and broaden it to make sure it responds to the points that you've made. Okay, great. Now we're getting somewhere. Of course, there are blocks and barriers. Of course there are. And part of it is like, human beings, and then part of it is just it's hard. People wonder, well, we can't have that until we solve this problem. We can't have that until we solve this problem. So let me ask you this. Is there, within that set of frameworks, if you had to now boil it down to something where you really, truly believe that a single idea coming out of this framework you've just articulated really could activate people to get excited, to join a movement, to realize that vision you just laid out as a group. What do you think if there's a single inspiring question or concept that could activate people to subordinate other things to work towards this vision? And if you don't know the answer, it's okay, because I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I can start to kick us off. I think the one area specifically around education and workforce and this alignment that folks are really already starting to galvanize behind is this issue of equity, right? I mean, as we've been engaging in conversations around school safety, as we engage in conversations around community safety, workforce development, and education, every constituent, whether you're affluent or you come from an impoverished community, has this focus on meeting the holistic needs of students in an equitable fashion. And, there's one thing everyone can agree is that they care about their kids, right? And they care about the students and the kids in their community. And so, tackling this equity agenda, in a way that tells parents, whether you live in a community where we have to be much more intensive around providing the resources you need to be successful, we're going to do that. And if you live in a less intensive resource community, but you need this alignment and opportunities to grow as a community, we're going to do that as well. Families are finally coming together and saying, you know what, yeah, we want all kids to receive these resources, where they are in school or throughout our community.
Sort of what we're doing here, and I'm going to open it up after everybody speaks one more time, is we're developing kind of like what could actually activate change? Is there a single concept or idea? And every social movement, somewhere or another, you come down to what idea gets people moving. Is it universal access to health care? Is it protection for your child against the threat of terrorism? You think through the different movements, the different major policy changes, what activates action? So Pedro just said, well, what activate action is a genuine and deeply shared equity agenda, I'm adding words I know, based on the primacy and value and eminence of the young. That people will rally behind the idea that the young deserve opportunity, protection, equity, et cetera. Okay, so youth agenda in the eminence of the young. Okay, anybody want to add to that?
Just one really quickly, again, not to, actually, I guess I shouldn't apologize for being the workforce guy, but a very concrete idea is going back to when I talk about career pathways and work-based learning, which is a few weeks ago I was in Switzerland, and Switzerland is known to have best talent internationally in the world, and they have about 2/3 of their students go through apprenticeships within the Swiss apprenticeship system, and it's a dual education, so it's not one or the other. It's not you do this or you go there. It's students engage, and then they can continue their education. So I went to a business where they're developing those concrete skills and knowledge and that education. So I think that again, on the workforce side, as a concrete policy agenda, ensuring that every student have a work-based learning, and that could be an internship or apprenticeship. And the reason for that is not, and we know there's been done before in regions or in countries, and the reason for that is because people only pay, I tell people all the time they want to be entrepreneurs or start a business. People aren't going to pay you just because you're passionate about something if you don't have the skill for it.
Okay, so let me just jump in. I'm being summarizing here. It's almost like, and this is good, Pedro said supporting the young is the right thing to do. And your point, complementing that, is it's a smart thing to do too. It's the right thing to do, but it also needs to be done. It's a smart thing to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, is there anything you want to add?
I'm going to build off of Pedro and Manny and say, to go to your summarizing, we need to do it. Nobody wants, and I visit a lot of parents and have a lot of conversations with them about what they see in their child's future. Nobody wants their child to do as good as every other child. They want their kid to be better. They want their kid to be competitive. They want them to have a fighting chance and to do everything that they can do. If you're familiar with Robert Putnam's Our Kids, liberal families will spend so much more money on their kids' educational progress, making sure that they have those internships, making sure that they have opportunities for themselves to succeed. We need to make sure that every kid has those opportunities to be competitive, to have a fighting shot at things, not just, oh, here are these programs, here are these equity mindsets we have for you, but are you really moving forward? Are you challenging things? Are you thinking on grade level and really saying, are you maximizing your potential? Nobody wants their kid to be equal. Yep. Everybody wants their kid to be competitive.
Yep. So I remember a slogan that was quite moving to people my age, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Okay.
So you asked, what are some examples of things that would get people ignited and get them involved in the movement? So I have two that have happened and are currently happening. So let's just think about the Supreme Court, Plyler versus Doe, that regardless of documentation status, students have the right to receive a public education. Let's be honest, we're seeing those rights infringed upon. And we saw DACA, we saw dreamers rise up and say, we have this right, and we're going to claim our right. So that galvanized people in really beautiful and positive ways. It's still an uphill battle, but that was incredible to watch that groundswell of youth, of families, of allies come together and say, these children have a right to be in our public education system. And then another example is language equity. So what I talked about in my TED Talk, We have families just in Aurora from 130 countries speaking over 150 different languages. We're one of the top 10 most diverse cities in the country. There's 9 other cities more diverse than us. How many of those families are experiencing phone calls and documents in English only? And then we blame families and say, oh, you're not involved, you're not supporting your child's education. Well, how can you when you don't understand the phone call, you can't read the paper, and when you show up at parent-teacher conferences and back-to-school night, you have no way to communicate with your child's teacher. So language justice, I've seen, and language equity get many families involved to say, we are here in this country, many of us have risked our lives to come here, and like you said, they want to be involved, very much so, because they know education is the key. So how do we support them in that language equity movement to make sure they're getting education in their native, they're getting communication in their native language to be actively involved in their kids' education? And we've seen a huge rising up of families to work on that issue.
Yeah, good, thank you. So have a defining issue that really speaks to where people are. It was your second point. Your first point, which kind of flows right along here, it was the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, it's the legal thing to do. It's actually, it's a legal thing to do, and a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Okay, this workshop had 3 questions. Is a third way possible? What could be the outlines of a national goal? And what could be a galvanizing logic to pursue that national goal? You did amazing. You didn't know any of these questions were coming. It's totally cold call all the way around. Let me invite the audience now. Would you like to further complicate their panel experience? In no particular order, but we'll, okay. Yep. You go ahead, then we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll start looking at the sides.
All right.
By the way, one more thing, I'm sorry. We have 15 minutes, so we're in kind of the lightning round. I want to encourage the audience members to begin with a what, why, or how come. Start so you can get right to your questions so we can get them right to answers and get more questions. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be quick.
Yeah.
So the reality check. This is where we want to be and should be going to, and the reality is self-segregation that I observe in my community. Our Latino children go to Latino charter schools. Our Jewish children go to private Jewish schools. And our affluent children go to also private schools. I'm in DC, so I observe it every single day. How do we reverse? I'm passionate about the public education. How do we reverse this trend?
Okay, great. So where we're going, because we had the third way, yes or no, big goal, what could it be? What could be galvanizing? This question, we may get others, is sort of, well, what are the blocks or the barriers that could prevent us from pursuing our big goal? Anybody want to, you don't have to all answer every question, because we'll get more questions if you don't. So anybody want to take that one?
I'll take this one.
Yeah.
If you can convince the children who are going to those self-segregated schools that they have something to gain from interacting with different communities, that they can learn more or they can make themselves more competitive, or their talent and opportunity will grow if they can interact and gain from being in a black school, with being in a Latina school, being in a Jewish school, then they will go. You have to make them want to do it instead of telling them you have to go there, because they're just going to keep, getting private industry to make their own schools.
I'll just really quickly push on the self-segregation. I think it's 100%, I think it's valid, but I think it's a bit more nuanced in the self-segregation. So in DC, if you're priced out of your home, and you have to only, and you could only be in certain areas, so I would push on the notion that it's all just self-segregation. There are other mitigating factors that pushes one to an area and to then default to a school and so on and so forth. So
I want to give Pedro a shot too to add, partly because I know what he did when he was superintendent of Lancaster Public Schools, because a whole lot of the kids from Lancaster Public Schools, from the high school McCaskey, went to my school, Franklin and Marshall College. And I'm thinking of Diana, who was from Rwanda, and I'm thinking of Kristen, who's from Vietnam, and Don, who's from China, and Preston and Megan, who are US born. Fantastic students, knocked it out of the park at our school. You had one of the most diverse school districts in America.
And I think, even piggybacking a little from what, from Manny shared, what I've seen in my experience is that it's not self-segregation. We create these systems and barriers that force, students and communities and families into real specific pathways. First, as Dan shared, and I want to be quick in answering, we have to ensure this transparency. Parents are choosing the schools that they send their kids to with very little information half the time. And when we ask them, so why did you send your child to this school? They say, well, it felt good, or it felt safe. And do you really know what the expected outcome is going to be in many of those places? One of the distinctions that we had, we were able to grow. Let me share a little bit about Lancaster. My daughter still goes to the School Lancaster School. It's 70%, free and reduced lunch, 77% students of color, 20% English learners, 18% students with IEPs. We have families that send their kids to the local high school that live in $2 million, mansions, and I have folks that, that are in $300, a month, rental homes. What we were able to do and accomplish in bringing all of those communities together is provide pathways, multiple pathways that met the needs of students where they were to receive, the best education possible. I'll share one quick example because I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to share this scenario. When we started in that community together, the honors courses and the advanced placement courses really just track programs. They were nice programs that folks put together so that affluent families had a place to send their kids. One of the first things we did is we made those programs student selected. Anyone who wanted to participate in an advanced placement course, an international baccalaureate course, we did away with honors courses. If it didn't, lead to some type of certificate, I wasn't paying for it, right? And so we made them self-selected. Then we offered after school, before school, after school, lunch and tutoring programs for students in advanced courses so we can incentivize kids who might have been struggling in those areas to take advantage in that course. We also opened it up so that a student who had an IEP in math could take an AP English course, unheard of in those circles. So we created this diversity. We went from a system where 12% of students of color were receiving advanced placement or international baccalaureate certificates to 77% of students receiving those certificates, students of color, 98% of those students being students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. All because we were transparent around what we were hoping to accomplish and we created student-centered pathways. Now, it was a work in progress and big investments had to be made. But one of the reasons, one of the things I found that when families are selecting these other alternatives is because it's absence of information and not realizing what the options are and how they can better take advantage of those opportunities.
I don't want to miss Veronica, if there's something you wanted to add to this.
No, just also that I encourage you to look into the history of why DC came to be self-segregated in that way. I look at our community of Aurora. 80010 is the most impoverished and impacted school district in the state intentionally. It's a refugee resettlement city. That's where apartments are the cheapest, that's where labor is, and families have been placed there intentionally, so they don't have the opportunity to interact with a lot of others because that's where they were intentionally placed. So I think it's important for all of us to do research and understand why did places come to be the way they are, and then how do we undo those systemic structures that exist to keep certain people in certain places and not able to be given every opportunity. So it's a great question you bring up, and I encourage you to really look into that and why that came to be.
Okay, I have two gentlemen here that I promised were next. So how about if you both ask your question so that we can then maybe answer fast and get a few more questions on the board.
From each of your vantage points, how can we make education more of a national issue and especially perhaps a more prominent issue in the upcoming presidential election?
Great. And second question?
I'm not an educator, I'm from business, but programs are great, but how do you teach or encourage individual families to leverage the resources that are available? I think a lot of the shortcoming comes from the lack of knowledge from our poorest families to fully leverage the stuff that is out there. When I was living in Atlanta, we had an organization that had money that we were giving away for scholarships for DeKalb County, and we had 2 applicants for about $20,000 worth of scholarships.
Yep. Okay, let's have one answer to each, and we'll get more questions. Anybody want to take the first question about national agenda, presidential election? One of you gets to be the spokesperson for the group.
Maybe because I'm closer to this. Quite frankly, candidates are afraid to make education a topic to run on because it loses elections. And you know why? Because our families know exactly what you're talking about when you're having a conversation around their local schools and their local education system. I think if you want to push an education agenda, we have to be really open and honest. With whether you're running for, on a presidential platform, a gubernatorial platform, or anywhere beyond, let's create platforms that our constituents actually know what we're talking about. And why folks stay away from education is because the moment you say, I want to improve the education system, every single one of the individuals that's going to vote for you knows exactly what they believe is needed to do so. So they don't discuss it.
If you haven't read Secretary Arne Duncan's new book, his point basically is that much of what we say about education is kind of a lie. He calls it a lie, that we say X but deliver Y. Anybody want to answer the question about families? Let's get one answer about how to help families have more readiness to know about resources that are there.
Mm-hmm. So to that, I would say that how do we have a more orchestrated and chorus response for families? And again, it was what some of us talked about, how sometimes we blame the families or we blame the organization, but it's how do we make sure schools are sharing the resources along with that organization. But then let's also be honest, sometimes families have been so disenfranchised and marginalized from the system, they're too afraid to walk into the school or ask for help. So how do we really help with that internalized racial oppression that happens? How do we help them understand it is your right to ask for help and resources, and we are here? So how do we meet halfway where the organization's meeting families where they're at and families feel comfortable? Because let's be honest, families don't have trust for the system for good reason. We have been failing them for years and years and generations, so it takes time to rebuild that trust to where you go from 2 applicants to hopefully 10, 20, 30, because once a few families find out and it's a good experience, they spread the word to their neighbors, to their aunts, uncles, and cousins, and then you bring everybody to you. So how do you start small with gaining trust of a few families? And trust me, the word spreads, and you'll have so many people knocking at your door, you'll have to get more scholarships.
This does, of course, touch the point about leadership, that leaders of institutions are responsible for learning about who their stakeholders are, what their needs are, how they get their information, and developing for ourselves our capacity to reach them as partners. Yes. And not every leadership model actually emphasizes that enough right now, although we're getting there, I hope. Let's take a question from this side and a question from this side, and then we're going to, I think, be at a break. So I'm going to call on Ann, because Ann went to Franklin and Marshall College. Now she works in education in D.C. And then on this side, I see a hand in the very back. So let's take your questions, and then we'll have some answers.
When every parent wants the best for their individual child, how do you convince them to become, those families with wealth and access, to become allies towards equity?
Great question. And then on this side?
I'm interested in your perspective on which is more important, to have equally excellent schools, regardless of the zip code, or to figure out a way to have goals that don't assume that there's one best system for those schools.
Okay. Let me invite Manny and Senegal, just because you didn't speak on the last question. Is there anything you'd like to address, let's say from Ann's question, about getting empowered families, upper income families, to value and care about the educational excellence of students they're not raising?
So I'll take the second question, because I'm not a wealthy family, so and I kind of wanted to cheat and have Veronica respond to that. But I actually think so. It's not a zero-sum game, and so I think if I had to, so I almost think when you asked the question, I was actually thinking about, well, is it one or the other? I think on a practical level, realistically, we keep saying I'll be 1,000 years old and we'll still say equally excellent schools, right? It makes sense, it's catchy, but I think on the pragmatist side of me, the realistic, the realism, is that what we should probably prioritize is how to, one, ensure that every student and family can access the information. So I guess in the short is, I think the latter, in terms of how we think about people are connecting to the system, I don't think that there's one best system, quite frankly, right? I just think that it's a false choice to say that there's one best system, because then that doesn't acknowledge or account for the differences in communities, whether it's ethnicity and nuances in Black, Latino, white, upper, low class communities. So I don't think that there's one best system, but I think there's best practices. And probably one of the best practices, which goes to the piece of the panel, is how do people, one, have access to the information, two, are prepared to engage meaningfully in the system, and then three, where they can make their informed decision. Because one really quick final thing, which is that when we talk about career pathways, we don't say we pick the career pathway for you. I want to give you all the information and you make an informed decision. So let's say if you want to be a social worker, when we know the median income of a social worker is $38,000 to $42,000, around that range, it's okay. If you want to be a construction worker, where actually the median is $101,000, and this is in Nevada, that's okay too. If you want to be a teacher, if you want to be an engineer. So I actually think, again, this is kind of also my personal bias, I think we should give people the information, let them make their informed decision, and not tell them that here's one best system. Because I'm okay if they pick something else. If they pick another pathway, I'm fine with that. But the challenge is they don't even know about those options or what the system is. So I don't think we should, there's not one best.
Okay, our other three panelists each answer one of those two questions. I'm saving Pedro for last because you're a superintendent, so you see it all. Yeah.
I really wanted to take Anne's question, so thank you for taking it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think the answer is to share power. If you can give parents more access and control over their children's education in a lower income school, then they're going to go to that lower income school because they're going to be more involved and have much more of a relationship with the teachers, with the administration, and now with their student as a part of that program instead of going to this wealthy school where they will have less control. Parents want to be involved. They want to make a difference in their child's education. So if you're willing to share power and give all families an opportunity to be a part of their child's education, then they'll flock to you.
Yeah, the scary thing is people may not be willing to share power. How come the way we fund schools is based on property taxes? Right. It seems like that reflects an assumption that, hey, I'll take my child where I want to take them, and you all deal with the rest.
They don't want to share power.
Yeah. So anything you want to add, Ron?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it is important for our families who have the economic means to support everyone for that equity agenda. But I also want to speak to what I've seen happen and some of the pitfalls and how we can work to address those. So I've seen many times upper income families come in and want to lead the PTAs, want to lead the PTOs, and not share that power piece. And a lot of families are turned off because there's a specific agenda set of this is what's best for everyone. And families are like, but can I talk about IEPs or can I talk about my child's academic performance? Like, nope, this is what we're talking about. So even in those spaces, again, how do we share power, but amongst families? So families don't feel like yet in the school, there's a dominance and a hierarchy of the upper class families running the school, and the rest of us are fending for scraps to try to make our voices heard. So I agree, how do we all work in unison? But there's a lot of work to do there of ego, sharing power, and also elevating, again, the voices of those most impacted. So while we're sharing power, we're in true community with one another, of listening to each other and what our issues are, and elevating them together and not being pitted against one another.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think you have the closing word here. Either of those questions speak to you?
Absolutely. The question about resources, it's actually one of the reasons we changed the infographic that I shared today. You've all seen the infographic with the boxes. And we actually heard a few times, but what if I'm one of the parents that's paying so that my student has 2 or 3 boxes? Why do you want to take my box and give it to, and give it to the shorter student? And so, one of the reasons we have this conversation around, all right, so what can we do as systems and system leaders? Let's invest on the front end to do away with, to break the systemic barriers that create those inequities, so that we don't have to go to the next level and ask, in Pennsylvania, the taxpayer who in one school district invests $27,000 per child, and whereas just 15 miles down the road, they invest $10,000 per child. And we start to have those conversations, and those discussions then become political, right? And they become an issue of, I want to take your resources to shift to some needier populations. But on the front end, we can have conversations in addressing equity by lifting and breaking those systemic barriers, so that we can be much more intentional around how we align those resources. And then tell families, I'm not, I don't want to take your resources to give to another community. We want you to have your resources, and we want to create a system by which everyone else can have access to the same opportunities our kids do each and every day at school and beyond, not just within a small window and because there's just the small level and amount of resources available.
Well, thank you. Let me say thank you to the Education Society program of the Aspen Institute, to Danielle, to Ross, your entire teams for all that you do to make this possible. In a time of life where there's so much rancor, so much disagreement, you heard 4 education leaders working in different sectors from different vantage points say we can develop a third way forward. You heard them say there is possible to develop a national agenda. We started to outline some of the features, and you heard them say that it's the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, the legal thing to do, and if I put a word in your mouth, the American thing to do to help every child develop what's great inside of her or him. Thank you all for being here, and we'll look forward to the next conversation. Thank you.